They would try and speed things up if they could, and indeed, when it came to meeting one of the milestones, they did just that. And now it looks like Nicola Sturgeon feels that her government is in a place where it can make these pledges. 5th of April, 26th of April, 17th of May, all big dates when it comes to opening up and getting out of lockdown. And I don't think the Scottish Government would be putting so much detail into those dates at the moment if it wasn't quite confident it was seeing the sort of data that meant that these targets can be hit.
The First Minister didn't say so much in terms of international travel and when that might restart yesterday. Do you think that will come up today? Do you think she might be pressed on that?
It's possible she'll get asked about that. And you know what? We can hear from her right now. So let's throw to her in Edinburgh.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. As you can see, I'm joined today by the Chief Medical Officer who will help me answer questions in a few moments. Before that, though, I'll just give you a quick update on a few issues and start, as I always do, with today's statistics. 625 positive cases were reported yesterday. That is 3% of the total number of tests, and it means the overall number of confirmed cases is now 211,230. Of the new cases reported yesterday, 179 of them were in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, 105 in Lothian and 97 in Lanarkshire. The rest of them are spread across 9 other health board areas. 422 people are currently in hospital. That is 18 fewer than yesterday, and 38 people are in intensive care. That's down 4 from the figure reported yesterday. I'm sorry to say, though, that 12 further deaths were reported yesterday. That takes the total number of deaths that have been registered under this definition we use in our daily figures to 7,529. However, National Records of Scotland has just published its weekly update, and you will recall that that includes cases where COVID is a suspected or contributory cause of death, not just deaths that have been confirmed through a test. Today's update shows that by Sunday, just past, the total number of deaths linked to COVID under the wider definition was 9,831. 104 of those were registered last week, and that's 38 fewer than in the previous week. Of the deaths registered last week, 86 occurred in hospital, 14 in care homes and 4 in homes or in other non-institutional settings. Now, the continued decline in deaths is very welcome, obviously. Deaths have now fallen by more than 3/4 since the 3rd week of January. And this week rather, is the first time in a long time that the number of deaths has been below the 5-year average for this time of year. So I think all of this provides further evidence of the effectiveness of the vaccination programme and is obviously very positive. That said, we shouldn't forget that the virus is still causing heartbreak to families across the country. We are still seeing people lose their lives from it. So once again, I want to send my thoughts and my condolences to all those who have lost a loved one. As I indicated yesterday, next Tuesday we will mark the first anniversary of lockdown last year, and on that day the whole nation will be invited to take part in a moment's silence when we can remember those we have lost and also remember and reflect on the painful sacrifices that people have made over the past year. Let me also now give you an update on the latest vaccination figures. As of 8:30 this morning, 1,981,818 people have received the first dose of vaccine. That's an increase of 38,311 since yesterday in first doses. In addition to that, though, 10,987 people received a second dose yesterday, and that brings the total number of second doses now to 181,879. Virtually all over 65-year-olds have now had the first dose of the vaccine, and as of this morning, so too have 67% of 60 to 64-year-olds, 42% of 55 to 59-year-olds and 34% of 50 to 54-year-olds. The figures I've just reported show that more than 40,000 people received vaccinations yesterday in total. That's the highest number in a single day that we've reported for some time, and shows that the programme is now accelerating again as supplies have picked up. Now, by the middle of April, we still expect to have offered a first dose to everybody over 50, all unpaid carers and all adults with particular underlying health conditions. And that will be a significant milestone because that will cover the significant majority of the Scottish adult population, but it will also cover groups that taken together account for 99% of all of the COVID-related deaths. So that's a key milestone that we're working hard to reach. Now, there's three other issues I want to very quickly cover today. The first relates to testing. As we start carefully, cautiously and gradually to take steps out of lockdown, we will rely on the high quality test and protect system that we have in place that, as you know, identifies people who have COVID. It then finds their contacts and gets these contacts to self-isolate so that we're breaking the chains of transmission. Today we're publishing an updated testing strategy for Scotland. It provides more details of the testing that's already in place for workers in key public services, which includes hospitals and care homes, and also in businesses that we think are potentially susceptible or more susceptible to outbreaks, and businesses which are of great importance to keeping Scotland going, food processing and distribution, for example. The strategy also gives information about the testing that is being made available for children and young people in secondary schools and for all staff in all schools, nurseries and childcare facilities. And it sets out how we're working with local authorities to make testing available to people without symptoms and targeting that at particular communities across the country, because that's an important additional way of trying to get levels, high levels of prevalence down where perhaps you have communities where it's higher than in the country overall or where it is stubbornly high. But finally, and this is the point I wanted particularly to point out to you today, the strategy provides details of a new genomic sequencing service that we will establish in Scotland. Genomic sequencing is something that you've heard us discuss in these briefings before. It enables us to identify the specific variations or characteristics of a virus within a specific sample. So it's really important in identifying new strains and variants. And that has been important in recent weeks to make sure that we are aware of any new variants that are causing concern. And it will also help test and protect teams to take steps to try to stop those new variants spreading within the wider community. Now, Scotland and indeed the whole UK already have extremely advanced genomic sequencing capabilities, probably amongst the best in the whole world. But in order to build on these capabilities, we are investing £13 million over the next year to establish a new sequencing centre, which will ultimately be capable of sequencing up to 1,000 samples every day. And that's going to be really important in this next phase of the pandemic, helping us to identify new variants at as early a stage as possible so that we can try, where those variants are of concern, to make as sure as we can that they don't get a foothold into the community and start to spread more widely. And also, as we look to the longer term and hopefully in the not too distant future start to come out of this crisis, this centre will support our preparedness for any future pandemics and indeed for any other possible public health threats. So it's going to play an important role in the immediate sense in the next phase of the pandemic, but be a really valuable asset for the country in years to come. And I thought it was worth just taking a bit of time to set that out today. Now, the second point I want to cover relates to shielding. Yesterday in Parliament, I set out some of this, but I just wanted to give a little bit more detail today. We expect that people who are on the shielding list should be able to return to their workplace if they can't work from home from the 26th of April. Until then, if you can't work from home, you should stay away from the workplace. In addition, children and young people on the shielding list should not attend school or childcare services until the 26th of April, and students on the shielding list should not attend college or university in person until that date. Now, I want to stress that this advice currently applies even if you have had one or both doses of the vaccine. The Chief Medical Officer will be writing this week to all people on the shielding list to give some more detail of that guidance that I have just summarised. And as before, that letter will act as a fit note, which means that it will serve as proof for your employer that you can't go to work if you need to provide that. However, by the 26th of April, we hope and expect that people on the shielding list will be able to return to work if you can't work from home or go back to university, college, school or nursery. And I know that will be very welcome for people who have had to bear, I think, a disproportionate burden of dealing with this virus over the past year. But until then, please follow the current guidance. And if you need additional advice and support, please check the shielding pages at mygov.scot. I am really grateful, and I want to emphasise this point to everybody on the shielding list for your forbearance and patience over the last year. I hope that you, like everyone else, are starting to feel a little bit less anxious, and I hope that you also have that sense that while there's a few weeks to go, there is brighter days ahead for you as there is for the rest of the country. And that's the point I want to finish on. As I set out yesterday in Parliament, I believe that the progress of vaccination does now give us a stronger sense of optimism than we've had for some time. That's why we were able to give details yesterday of what we can expect to see over the next couple of months. We expect that from the 2nd of April, the stay-at-home rule will be replaced by stay-local guidance. On the 5th of April, we expect to see the reopening of hairdressers and barbers and to take the first steps in the reopening of retail services. In the weeks after that, from 26 April, we expect that shops will fully reopen and hospitality services will start to reopen as well. And at that point, we hope that travel restrictions, at least within mainland Scotland, will be lifted and that we will all have a bit more freedom to meet up with others. I was also able to set out yesterday our hope, although this as always depends on the course of the pandemic, that we will move to progressively lower levels of restriction as we enter June before progressing to a much more normal way of life during the summer. So I do think that should give all of us some considerable cause for optimism right now. But as always, and I know this is the bit people are less keen to hear, that optimism has to be balanced with caution. We have seen, and I set this out in Parliament yesterday, a bit of an uptick in cases over the past week or so. That's a really stark reminder to all of us that we can't be complacent against this virus and we mustn't ease up too soon. Because if we do that, the risk that we face right now is that things start to go in the wrong direction and that will set us all back. None of us want that to happen. So we still need to remember that we need to suppress the virus right now while vaccines do their work so that we then can come out of lockdown on that indicative timeline safely. So please, for now, and I know how difficult it is, continue to stick to the tough rules and guidance that are in place. Until the 2nd of April, the message continues to be stay at home, except for essential purposes. Don't meet up with other households inside, and on any occasion when you are outdoors, comply with the limits. It's now 4 people from 2 households allowed to meet together outdoors, and always remember facts. Wear your face covering, avoid places that are busy, clean your hands and hard surfaces, 2 metres distancing at all times, and self-isolate and get tested if you have symptoms. We are now on the right track. There's no doubt about that, but staying on that right track and continuing to go forward down that track depends, as it always has done, on all of us. The vaccination programme will increasingly do more of this work for us, but until it gets to the point where it can take that strain, we all need to continue to do these things to keep this virus at bay. So my thanks, as always, to all of you for complying with all of this, for doing all of these really difficult things. As you do it over the next few weeks, let's all keep our eyes firmly on that brighter horizon that I think does now, my apologies, lie ahead of us. So with those comments, I'm going to end there and go to questions, and Gregor will help me with the questions as always. So first today is Katrina Renton from BBC.
Good afternoon, First Minister, and thank you very much. Just to say, we're at Glasgow Airport this morning, and you can probably see behind me that there's not a soul here. Now, I've been talking to experts in the industry, and what they've been saying is that they know you can't give them a fixed date for when things are going to start again, but what they are looking for is a framework so that they can get ready to push the go button when it's okay. And the other thing that they're asking for is a 4-nation approach, saying that if England were to go ahead of us, then that could mean big problems with airlines moving their aeroplanes to other airports in England, and people obviously using those airports and doing irreparable damage to the travel industry. And also briefly, just about this idea of progressing to some sort of normality, we're just wondering What does that mean? Does that mean that maybe in the summer we might be able to stop wearing face masks and maybe there might be some indoor mass gatherings again?
Okay, thanks, Katrina. Gregor may want to add to the comments I will, as briefly as possible, make right now. I set out in Parliament yesterday that we'll be talking to the aviation sector over the course of this week about when and to what extent we might start to see some international travel be possible again. Like the UK government, I don't think that will be possible before the 17th of May, but my view is that it is also likely not to be possible for a period after that. And I take no pleasure in saying that. All of us want to have every aspect of life back to normal, and for the benefits of our individual freedoms as well as the importance of international travel to our economy, I want to see that back to normal. But we know two things right now. One, while we see lots of signs for hope here domestically in Scotland and across the UK, the picture is not as rosy in many other parts of the world, including some other parts of Europe, where we are starting to see some increase again in incidence of the virus, and Central Europe in particular, I think, is in that category. So we have to be cautious. This is a global pandemic, and we've got to be cautious about the global picture as we take the decisions about our interconnectedness. But the other thing is what I was talking about. We know that at this stage in the circulation of a virus, there are particular risks of mutation and new variants and strains emerging. We're already seeing that. We've got the new variant that emerged here in the UK before Christmas. We've got the new Brazil variant, the South African variant. Now, you know, when a virus is circulating at the levels this one is, not just here, but globally, that's going to happen. So we must be really cautious, because if we end up, and thankfully we don't think we're in this position yet, but if we end up with a new variant being imported into the UK or Scotland and circulating within the community, and if that particular new variant happens to be more transmissible, like the Kent one is, more severe, or possibly the worst of all, that it undermines the effectiveness of the vaccine. So there has to be work done to modify the vaccines, and then that interrupts that, then we will be in a really difficult position again. So this is likely to be one of the restrictions that is in place for longer. And that is just a hard fact. I wish it were different, but it's not at the moment. Now, I've been working really hard to try to get a Four Nations approach to how we deal with borders and international travel. That's not been possible to get entirely thus far, because England, as is the right of the UK government to take decisions they think are right, are having a less restrictive approach to manage quarantine. Now, I will continue to try to get a Four Nations approach, but my job is to protect Scotland as much as I can. And if I think the decisions that the UK government are arriving at for England, it is their right to arrive at them. But if my judgment, based on the clinical advice I take, is that they don't go far enough to protect Scotland, then clearly I have to act with the protection of Scotland as my first and foremost consideration, and that's what I will continue to try to do. Now, before I hand over to Gregor, on what does normality look like? We don't know that for sure yet. I am more hopeful, mainly because of the vaccine, than I've been for a long time, that when we talk about getting back to something closer to normality, it is a lot closer to normality than I might have envisaged just a couple of months ago at the turn of the year. I deliberately talked yesterday, partly because I'm desperate to do it as well, and I know how desperate everybody else is to do it, that over the summer, I really, really hope we'll be able to hug loved ones again. And for many of us, I think that if we could pick one thing, that's probably what it would be. I also talked yesterday about being really hopeful that over the summer we'll be able to have gatherings again, you know, concerts and nightclubs, sporting events, and I indicated we'll be talking to the event sector, which is a diverse sector, about potential capacity limits in stadiums. We all want, not all of us will be able to be there in the stadium even in normal times, but we all want to be cheering Scotland on in the Euros come the summer. So I'm more hopeful now about all of that than I have been right now. Can I guarantee it? I can't guarantee anything, absolutely, in the face of a virus like this. But if we all keep doing the right things and the vaccine programme continues to go well, I think we've got every reason to be hopeful of that. Now, does that mean we'll be able to throw all caution to the wind and have no restrictions? Probably not. So hand hygiene is going to be really important, and maybe masks for a while yet, and some other mitigations. But while we would love to have nothing of that nature, I think most of us, if that's where we end up in the summer, being able to hug our loved ones and maybe, go to see whatever it is we enjoy doing, have a meal in a restaurant with friends, then if we're still having to wear a mask and wash our hands more regularly than we did a year ago, I think that probably would be a reasonable compromise for people. So let's just stick with it just now. The more we suppress right now and the more people we vaccinate, the more normality I think we have the prospect of come the summer. And I'll try to keep people as up to speed with our thinking and our assessment of that as we go along. But my final point, and then I will hand over to Gregor, let's not allow that optimism to lead to complacency. We have seen an uptick in cases in the past week. That is not something we should be complacent about. So if we all decide now summer's here and we're just going to go back to normal, when we actually, for now, should be staying at home, then all bets could be off on this. So let's stick with it and hope that much sunnier summer is definitely lying ahead of us.
Katrina, thanks. I spent a little bit of time last night looking over some of the data from different countries across Europe, and there's no doubt about it, there are many countries across Europe who are back into experiencing that exponential growth in the number of cases that they are seeing. Some of them, some of the largest countries in Europe just now. They are experiencing that partly because they are now being exposed to three particular variants of concern which are now seeding across Europe. The B117 variant, which we've had in play here since just before Christmas, is now widely seeded across Europe, and many of these countries are seeing this rapid growth as a consequence of that. But we also have some countries in Europe just now, more worryingly, that are seeing growing cases of both the variant which was first identified in South Africa and more recently the variant which was identified in Manaus in Brazil. And when we look at those cases just now, I guess that's the biggest source of concern that I have, is are those two latter variants going to establish themselves in continental Europe as a potential source of problems? That worries me, not just because of the rate of transmission that are associated with those viruses, but because of the potential that they still have for immune escape as well. And so we're monitoring that situation very, very closely. And that emphasises why it's still really, really important to make sure that we are taking all the safeguards that we possibly can to limit the introduction of those back into our own country just now. On the second point, I think there's still a number of variables that we have that we still need to fully bottom out before we can determine what normality looks like during the summer. We still don't have all the data that we would like to get a sense of what the vaccines do for transmission, but certainly there's very optimistic and encouraging data that we have at this stage. We don't yet know to what extent the uptake of the vaccine is going to be across the whole population, but again, I'm very encouraged by the very high uptakes that we have at this point in time. And then, as we go through more and more of those priority groups, the people who are most at risk, we'll start to get a clearer sense of what the hospitalisation rates and the serious illness rates are for those people as well. And as we fully determine those, that will be able to allow us to calculate, well, what degree of population protection is there for that summer period. There's likely to be a seasonal effect as well, because we know that UV light has an impact on this virus and the way that it transmits as well. So all these factors will come together, and that will allow us to make a judgment based on what the safest approach is as to what normality is going to look like in that summer period. Now, not all the population will have had their second dose by that point in time, and that's a factor we have to consider as well. But I am optimistic what we'll have is a much more open society if we're very careful at this point in time as we open up during that summer period than we're perhaps we could have anticipated earlier on this year. The vaccine effect is doing a heck of a lot of heavy lifting for us just now, and I expect that to continue.
Ross Govins from STV.
Afternoon, First Minister. I do have a specific question on hospitality, but this is your first chance to respond to statements made by David Davis in the Commons regarding the government's handling of allegations against Alex Salmond. I wondered if you would like to do that. On hospitality, some areas of the sector are accusing you of not following the data, especially when it comes to drinking alcohol indoors. They say pubs just won't open if they can't serve alcohol inside, and they're asking, why haven't they seen any evidence to justify that decision?
OK, on the first part of your question, and other journalists can take note of this as well, because this is the only comment I'm going to make over the course of this COVID briefing. Any other questions can be directed in other ways. Other than to say that I strongly refute the suggestions and insinuations from David Davis in the House of Commons last night, I am not going to have this COVID briefing sidetracked by the latest instalment of Alex Salmond's conspiracy theory, and that's just how it is today. I have given 8 hours of evidence to the Parliamentary Committee looking into this. They are now able to assess all of the evidence they've taken, including, I'm sure, the evidence they have in relation to the suggestions and claims made by David Davis last night. They have a job of work to do now. I'm going to allow them to do that job of work. And in the meantime, I'm going to get on with my job, which for the moment is leading this COVID briefing, because I'm pretty sure most of the people watching right now want to hear about the COVID situation. So I'll make that comment, and that is all I am saying in the course of this briefing. On hospitality, I see the comments from hospitality, and I suppose I have 2 simultaneous feelings. One is overwhelming sympathy, and that's the main one actually, for businesses in the hospitality sector who have been disproportionately hit, not exclusively hit, but disproportionately hit because of the nature of the services they provide and the way viruses spread. The other, I suppose, is just a complete rejection of the sense and any suggestion that hospitality is somehow being unfairly treated. It's not. There is no agenda or motivation, possible motivation on the part of the government to do that. We are trying to take a balanced, careful, considered and cautious route out of lockdown that allows us to go forward and come out of lockdown, hopefully make it the last time we're in lockdown, and make that one directional and not set ourselves back. The call for evidence, and I appreciate sometimes I share, and Gregor will this will resonate with Gregor because it's usually me asking him for more evidence on lots of things. Sometimes we overcomplicate this though, because at heart here, the evidence and the science is not complicated. Infectious viruses spread when people come together, and they spread more in places where people are more likely to be close together, not be 2 metres physically distant, in places where there is perhaps poorer ventilation, and in places where people's inhibitions are perhaps a bit lowered, which happens when people drink alcohol. So that is why hospitality is not the only place this virus will spread. It will spread wherever people come together, but it is an environment, generally, obviously different types of hospitality premises, but generally speaking, these are environments where the risk is greater. And that's just the basic science and evidence. And I appreciate the constant desire for it to be more complicated than that, but it's not. One of the things I often reflect upon, and it's not meant as a criticism because I understand where it comes from, is that every sector I speak to tells me that the evidence doesn't back up that COVID spreads where they are. Well, COVID is spreading somewhere. Even now with lower rates, it's still spreading. And we do know the factors that increase the risks of transmission. What we're trying to do is get hospitality back to normal, just as we're trying to get all of the economy back to normal as quickly as possible. So on the 26th of April, we hope, if everything continues to go as we want it to do, that hospitality will start that reopening process. It will outdoors be able to operate, if not completely normally, because limits on people gathering together will still be in place, but almost normal opening hours, and be able to serve alcohol, and there'll be no requirement for people to have food with alcohol. So as close to normal as we think it's safe to be at that point, outdoors. But also on the 26th of April, we hope to have some limited indoor opening. Now, that is different to what's been set out for England. At the moment, under England's route map, there's no indoor hospitality until the middle of May. So actually, that would take us a little bit ahead of the position in England. But because indoors is more susceptible to transmission risks, we have to have greater restrictions, at least for a period. And that means that indoors, for that initial 3 weeks, we are saying at this stage it is likely to be non-alcoholic drinks and food being served. to take away some of those risks of people coming together in a way that increases the risk of transmission. You know, is that a position I want to be in? I would love to just say to pubs and restaurants right now, open your doors. I would love, as I'm sure everybody would be, to go and, you know, sit at the weekend and have a coffee or a drink somewhere as well. But we can't do that. If we do this in a way that is not sensible and responsible, we will be back in lockdown going into the summer rather than coming out of lockdown and all hopefully enjoying a much freer summer. So I appreciate the frustrations, I really, really do. But my responsibility, you know, the biggest responsibility I've got right now, as has been the case since this time last year, is to try to steer us through this as best I can and as safely as I can. And I'm not going to give up on doing that. Do you want to say any more about the risks of transmission indoors?
I think we are all very well aware of the transmission dynamics of this virus by now, and we know that it transmits much more readily indoors when people are closer together, when there is less ventilation, when there is likely to be surfaces that people are touching, and for that reason, as I say, when in certain environments where perhaps we let our guard down more readily as well. I think that's all very well established. There's a very firm national and international database in relation to that. I actually long for the days when we can get back into different aspects of hospitality. I miss it dearly. I've had tremendous sympathy for the experience that sector has had over the last 12 months, and we just need to make sure that what we do as we take these next steps is that we don't walk too quickly, too soon, and allow that transmission to re-establish itself just now, particularly with the infection rates that we have just now. And at this moment in time, there is a very real possibility if we go too far, too fast, and open these type of environments where infection is likely to spread much more easily, then that's exactly what we'll experience. And that will have an impact not only in that sector, but in wider sectors as well.
Peter McMahon from ITV Border.
Thank you very much, First Minister. First Minister, the figures for the south of Scotland, for Dumfries and Galloway and for the Scottish borders show very low levels of COVID at the moment. The rollout of vaccine in the south of Scotland is also very good. Now, you said yesterday that the level system is there if we need it. Is there not a case that come at least the 26th of April, if that progress that's made in the south of Scotland continues to be made, then areas like that could go faster in terms of reducing the levels? At the moment, it would be level 1 perhaps, or level 2. Could they go down further if other areas of Scotland are lagging behind? And would it be safe to do so?
I don't know, Peter, because we're not at the 26th of April yet. I'm given the best assessment from this perspective of where we might be, and I don't know how many times I have to go sort of, and I'm happy to do it as often as it takes to go through the thought processes and the analysis here. We think, so right now, while yes, there is variable incidence across the country, we're not yet at the critical mass of vaccination to start to significantly ease restrictions, because these low rates are down to lockdown. And if we start to lift lockdown, what you'll find is the borders don't have those low rates of incidence. They'll suddenly have much higher rates of incidence. So that's the position right now. Our best judgment at the moment is that when we get to the 26th of April, we should come down as a whole country, certainly the whole country that is currently within level 4. There are islands, of course, that are already in a lower level, and we will consider them separately. But to come down together, because we think at that point that will be a reasonable thing to do, it is important that we ease restrictions carefully, even at that point. And of course, if we, at that stage we want, because people have been separated with loved ones in different local authority areas, we want to be able to lift travel restrictions at that stage. If we immediately go to different levels, then there is a possibility then that we'll have to keep some kind of travel restrictions in place between different local authority areas. Otherwise, we get the virus moving around. So that's our judgment of the best way to come out of lockdown at that initial substantial significant stage. You know, if that changes substantially between now and the 26th of April, we will set that out. But that's our judgment at the moment, to give the maximum number of people across Scotland the maximum freedom at that point, including the freedom to travel across a local authority boundary to see your loved ones. Some people, because of the easing of the outdoor limit last week have been able to, some people would have been able to see their mum in the garden on Mother's Day. Others, and I include myself in this, who live in a different local authority area to their parents, don't yet have that. So we want to try to get to that. And therefore, at least initially, if we can come out as uniformly as possible, then I think we give more people more freedom overall. But after that, we may have outbreaks. And Dumfries, if you remember the first outbreak when we came out of lockdown before, it was in your part of the world, around Gretna, and we had to put restrictions in place. And that's where the level system may have to be used again. But I think most people want to be able to operate across Scotland as freely as possible just now. So that's our judgment at the moment, and we'll continue, obviously, to keep all these things under review. Peter Smith from ITV.
Good afternoon, First Minister. In a series of allegations last night in his parliamentary privilege speech, David Davis alleged that a legal document had been deliberately withdrawn, in other words, suppressed from being handed over to a court. Is that something that you know happened, and is that not a summary dismissal?
Look, I've said what I'm going to say on that. I refute the insinuations and suggestions of David Davis. I'm not having this briefing sidetracked into the latest instalment of the conspiracy theory that we've all been hearing about for a long time. The committee is looking at all of these things. I've given it my evidence, and that is where I'm going to leave it today. So do you have a COVID question, or if not, I'm going to move on?
Well, I respect your prerogative to choose how you answer that, First Minister, but it is my job to choose what is, I think, questions that are of most importance to the public interest. And that is my question. Did that happen? Are you investigating that? And is that a summary dismissal? The
committee is looking at all of this, and I'm letting the committee do its job. Do you have a COVID question?
I may well have a COVID question, but
right.
I have to say I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable with what questions are asked in a public platform.
I've answered the question. These are all matters that are being looked at by a committee of inquiry. I have given 8 hours of evidence to this committee. I'm going to let it do its job, and I'm going to go on with doing mine. So if you want to ask a COVID question, I'm going to give you one last opportunity, and then I'll move on.
I absolutely respect your decision and your office, First Minister, but I ask you to respect that we have to have the freedom to choose what questions we ask.
I'm not disputing that. I've answered the question in the way I'm going to answer it, and I'm going to move on now to James Matthews, who will probably try to ask it again. So, James Matthews.
Thank you, First Minister.
Thanks very much, First Minister. With respect, I mean, you were asked by Peter about a document that related to the judicial review brought by Alex Salmond. You said it was a matter for the committee, which it currently is, but at the time, it was a matter for your government, and it was a matter that made your challenge to Alex Salmond's judicial review collapse. To repeat Peter's question, as you rightly predicted, why was there an email that wasn't in the legal bundle presented to your external counsel that prompted fury by them? And they're very relieved that they actually didn't take that to court. It was for them, they spoke of extreme embarrassment at the fact that they had been essentially poorly briefed. There was a key document missing. The question is, why was it missing and who removed it?
Based on what David Davis says last night, I am not able to add anything. You would have to ask him for more detail of his allegation. The government's legal advice has been passed on to the committee. So some of what you've already said, the public can go on and read, and the committee are currently considering that with all of the other evidence. Now, that is the position right now. I've given evidence to that committee, and I'm not going to say any more while the committee is doing its job. So do you have a COVID question, or am I going to move on?
No, with respect, First Minister, 2 years ago, it was a matter for your external counsel and a matter for your government that the bundle of documentation was provided to your external counsel with a view to proceeding to court to challenge Alex Salmond's judicial review, but there was a key document missing. Because of that key document being somehow withdrawn, your challenge collapsed. That's not a matter for the committee today. It was a matter for you then.
I'm not sure that is a proper characterisation of what actually happened. The
what
information.
Did happen?
Well, you're going on the basis of what David Davis said in the House of Commons last night.
No, I'm going on the basis. With respect, First Minister, I'm going on the basis of what your external counsel told you. They were furious at the time.
The reason, James, the reason you know what external counsel said is because we have published all of that information. The information is there. You can see it, you have seen it. The public can go onto the Scottish Government website or the committee website and read all of that themselves. We have made all of that information available to the committee. It's now for the committee to reach its conclusions. I was questioned at length when I appeared before the committee myself on the decision-making around the judicial review. I sat before that committee, rightly and properly, for 8 hours. I'm now going to let that committee do its job, and I'm going to go on with doing my job. So do you have a COVID question?
First Minister, if I may, and forgive me, but one thing that nobody can read is the consultation note that was prepared for November the 13th, 2018, a meeting that you attended with external counsel. What did that consultation note say about the state of your legal challenge? Because that's not been published.
Look, I think I talked about the 13th of November to the committee, which was my meeting with council after their note, I think of the 31st of October, to assure myself that we still had a stateable, defendable case to make. I've covered that with the committee, so I'm going to let the committee do its job and I'm going to get on with mine. So Alan Smith from Bauer.
Thank you, First Minister. Just in regards to travel restrictions with COVID, and particularly the travel restrictions within across the UK, you were saying that they could be lifted from April 26th. What will be the deciding factor in this? Is it what's happening here in terms of cases and vaccinations, or is it what's happening in Northern Ireland or England, perhaps? Because we know that there are people living within Scotland who are desperate to visit family in other parts of the UK. Can you give them a clearer idea of when that decision will be made? And just briefly, if I may, would you describe the dates that you set out yesterday as being best case scenario for Scotland, or would there be any scope to bring any of those dates forward if the data allows that?
So on the first question, it will be a mixture of those things. It will be an assessment of the data here, but also when you're talking about travel from other parts to or from other parts of the UK and international travel, clearly we have to look at the situation elsewhere as well. So we will take an overall judgment. I want to get travel restrictions within or to and from Scotland and other parts of the UK, and indeed the common travel area, lifted as soon as possible for the very reason you talk about, the family connections across the border with England, people with family in Northern Ireland and Wales as well. But we need to take a judgment on that slightly closer to the time, and that's what we will do. In terms of, is it best case, could they come forward? I've always said, and I will say this again as a matter of principle, that if we think we can get people back to normal more quickly, we will do so. But I think the closer we get to dates, and I know 26th of April still feels quite a way away, then I think the less likely it becomes that you suddenly see dates brought forward. So the next easing of restrictions will be the 5th of April. And then we will give 3 weeks to assess the data and also, we hope, reach that critical milestone in our vaccination programme before we move on to the more substantial easing on the 26th of April. So I'm not going to stand here and rule out 100% that nothing will happen quicker than we're predicting right now, but I think people should look at the dates we set out yesterday as the most likely timeline out of lockdown that we're going to face over the next 2 months. Can I add anything?
Yeah, we're looking at a variety of different data, both here and in also those other places as well. And you'll know from previous conversations that I've had with you all that the links between the 4 nations and the conversations between the CMOs are very, very strong. We continually compare the data that we're experiencing in our own countries, and we'll be looking at things like the volume of infectious cases that we have here and in other countries of the United Kingdom, the positivity rates. We'll also be looking for the emergence of any further variants of concern, or whether there is any evidence that any of the variants that we do know about are starting to seed themselves within the UK and kind of beginning to kind of spread in that respect as well. So all these are things which we'll be taking into consideration. 5 or 6 weeks is still a long time in play with this virus, and we'll make sure that we take those decisions when we need to, in order that we safeguard the interests of Scotland first and foremost.
Phil McDonald from Global.
Thanks, First Minister. In your announcement yesterday, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was no specific plan for getting care home visiting back to greater normality. So I'm just wondering when families can expect to see sort of a more natural visiting pattern.
Well, we have, as you know, Phil, we a few weeks back issued new guidance to enable some, albeit still limited, care home visiting indoors, and we're working with the sector to make sure that that happens wherever it is possible for that to happen. We will be reviewing that guidance over the next few weeks and hopefully issuing fresh guidance at a point where we think it is safe to allow greater normality to return to care home visiting. It's one of the areas where we know from experience we've got to be really careful, but it's also one of the areas where the impact of the vaccination is already greatest in terms of reducing the burden in terms of death. So we have to balance all of that, and I want to give an assurance to people who are in this position of having a loved one in a care home that they're not able to see normally, that we want to get that back to normal as quickly as it is safe to do. But Gregor might want to add something.
Yeah, we keep the guidance for visiting, both for care homes and for hospital visiting, under fairly constant review, just to make sure that we're taking stock of progress, first of all with data on vaccinations and the impacts that that's having, but also, again, it goes back to community transmission as well, and what the relative levels of infection are within those surrounding communities, because we know that they're very, very closely linked. And that guidance continues under review, and when we're at a stage where we can begin to move that further forward and begin to open up visiting even further using the mitigations that are already in place for people, we'll make further announcements linking in with our colleagues, particularly in that care home sector, so that we manage that transition effectively.
Neil Pooran from PA.
Thanks, First Minister. If I can ask about the recent uptick in cases which we've seen over the last week or so. I don't want to read too much into a single day's figures, but I note we had 625 cases today, which seems to be continuing that trend. Do we know what's driving this increase? Obviously, we've had the return of pupils to schools recently. Would it just be that, or is there potentially something else at play here? And also the issue of the Rangers celebrations in Glasgow earlier this month. I think you mentioned yesterday that we might be seeing more cases emerge that were potentially connected to that. Are you able to give any update on what's going on with that?
Gregor and I have been talking about some of these issues already this morning. He'll want to say a word or two. On the uptick in cases, yes, over 600 cases today. It's 3% positivity today, though, so I would, as I usually do, I would urge people to look at not just the total number of cases, but also the percentage, because the total number will depend on overall number of tests. So the test positivity today is lower than it was yesterday, even although the total number of cases is a bit higher than it was yesterday. But over that 7-day period, we have seen that slight uptick. What is that being caused by? You know, schools going back may well be part of that, not, and I always need to stress here, not transmission within schools, but the greater activity that is caused by the return of schools. You know, we're all getting fed up with living under restrictions. It may well be that we're just all maybe needing to remind ourselves that we have to comply absolutely with these restrictions for a period longer. There's been a very small number of cases, we think, through the case management system associated with the gatherings in Rangers. There may be more, maybe people who were at that, if they've got the virus, they may not be saying they were at that, I don't know, but Gregor can say a little bit more about that. I think taken in its entirety, the other point Gregor and I were talking about, and he will probably very quickly and rightly say there's no scientific kind of basis, hard basis for this, but we've generally, apart from certain periods, had lower prevalence in Scotland than in other parts of the UK, which means that we've still got a bigger population that won't have natural antibodies to this virus. So there's maybe a greater susceptibility relative to England, Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland, and that's maybe just marginally an issue right now, but that's me looking at it as a non-scientist and non-clinician. Taking it all together though, I think the case numbers over the last week is just a hard reminder that the virus hasn't magically disappeared. It's there, and if we let it spread, it will spread. And while the vaccine, we think, is already reducing illness and death, and hopefully will increasingly have an impact on transmission as well, we don't yet have that critical mass of the population vaccinated to start really bearing down on transmission. So that is still down to us. And so if all of us, and I include myself in this, if we're just easing up a little bit on the restrictions compliance right now, please just tighten up again, because if we take our foot off this brake too soon, the hopeful stuff I was setting out yesterday does become, more doubtful, and I don't want that to happen. So we need to make sure we collectively keep ourselves on the right path.
Well, thanks, Neil. What do we know about the data that we're seeing just now? Well, let me go through some figures with you just now. So if we look at the last 7 days, we've had 4,074 cases in the last 7 days compared to 3,601 in the 7 days before that period. So you're right, there's been a slight rise over that period of time. And if we look at the age groups where those infections are most common and where that rise is particularly represented, it's in the 25 to 44-year-old age group, where we've got roughly equal proportions between male and female within that age group as well. And in the areas of Scotland, it tends to be the Central Belt. It's Ayrshire and Arran, it's Lanarkshire, and it's particularly Glasgow just now. And we've seen that Glasgow City as a local authority is probably showing the highest 7-day cumulative incidence of any of the local authorities in Scotland just now. So that's the data, and that's what it's telling us just now. We now have 6 local authorities who are sitting with over 100 cases per 100,000 on the 7-day cumulative incidence. The reasons for that? Well, as schools go back together, it releases parents to do more things. Some may have gone back to work, some may be taking opportunities to stop and speak to people that they weren't doing beforehand when they're dropping off kids to school. There are outbreaks in some institutions which are contributing to that as well. All these factors come together and have just caused that slight tick up in the rates that we are seeing just now. And we've got to be cautious. And that's why this next stage for us is really, really important, that everyone is just making all the efforts that they can to make sure that we don't allow this to really kind of spread even further at this moment. I'm asking people to really stick with it for a little bit longer to make sure that we don't allow this infection to kind of begin to rise and run away from us again. And you asked about the significance of the events in Glasgow over, not last weekend, but the weekend before, when Rangers were crowned champions. One of the things that we are seeing in the conversations through Test and Protect there is that there is certainly a small number of people who have been very honest, and I'm very grateful for their honesty in saying that they were part of those celebrations. And that's allowing us to make sure that we can then contact people that they may have been in contact with and ask them to isolate as well, to try and break these chains of transmission. And again, it's a plea to everyone is if you've got symptoms, go and get a test. Make sure that we know whether you're going to test positive for COVID-19 or not. Let's try and make sure that we're not spreading this infection any further than it needs to spread. And if you're asked to isolate, please isolate and give us as much honesty in your answers, please, as you can, so that we can identify those who you've been in contact with, so that we can ask them to isolate and break those chains of transmission as well. That's the essential things that we need to do to make sure that we don't allow this slight uptick in infection that we're seeing just now to become a much greater impact that could potentially jeopardise the speed at which we begin to approach the opening up before summer.
Jane Bradley from the Scotsman.
Thank you, First Minister. You announced today this new service for genomic sequencing in Scotland, and you said it would have a capacity of 1,000 tests a day. Does that mean if we remain under 1,000 cases a day in Scotland, every single positive test is going to be sequenced? And therefore, does that mean every single possible mutation of the virus is going to be tracked in future?
So I guess in simple arithmetic terms, if we were under 1,000 cases a day, when we get this operating at capacity, we'd have the capacity to do that. I'm not sure the clinical scientific choice would be to genomically sequence absolutely every case, and that's probably the point I'll hand over to somebody who's a lot more expert on these things than I am.
One of the things that's happened over the course of these last 12 months has been the development of genomic sequencing in terms of how we track and survey the kind of spread of this virus across the country. It's been one of the very important clinical developments. There's always been a pathogen genomic service that's there, but the way that that's expanded and allowed us to understand both the behaviours of the virus and also the changing nature of the virus over time as well has been absolutely fabulous. I pay tribute to all the scientists and the clinicians who've been involved in this service. And what this new announcement today represents is, I guess, our commitment to the importance of this as we go forward, not just as we kind of track COVID-19, look for the changes in the virus that will still occur over time, identify new variants as they arise, so that we can stay ahead of the virus, make sure that our tests stay appropriate for tracking the virus, make sure that future vaccine development stays in line with the kind of predominant types of virus that we're seeing, but also allows us to extend into identifying and understanding much more about other pathogens, infectious pathogens across the country as well. And yes, I would like to get to the stage where the infection's so low that we can track all the virus and sequence it so that we can understand fully and make sure that there's that degree of surveillance over the development of this virus so that, as I say, we stay ahead in that way. One of the things that the Genomic Service has been very good at is giving us the additional information as well, a new form of epidemiology to give us information about how this virus starts to spread, both within institutions but across the society as well. We've seen 2 or 3 really important studies that have enhanced our understanding of how this virus spreads over the last 12 months from this service. So this is a massive investment for Scotland. It really places us, what was already a world-leading service, takes it even further forward as well. And I think gives us a legacy here, which allows us to be much better prepared and much more confident of how we deal with further infectious threats in the future.
Thanks. Tom Martin from the Express.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, First Minister. Today we're expecting to see the EU unveiling its COVID certification scheme to allow travel. Does developments such as that, will that help increase the likelihood of Scots being able to get overseas for holidays this year? Or is it still your advice not to book any foreign holidays this summer?
So my advice right now is not to travel overseas unless it's essential. I hope that at some point as we go through this year that advice can change, but that's my advice right now. As we go forward, it may be that vaccine certification, some kind of vaccine passport has a role to play, and I've never ruled that out. I've also said openly, as others have, that there's some quite complex issues that we have to work through on that, not least the ethical and equity issues. We know not everybody can get vaccinated, so where does that leave people who can't get vaccinated in terms of the freedoms that a passport might open up for the rest of us? But we are contributing to the World Health Organization Smart Vaccination programme on vaccine certification, and that includes consideration of the technical specification, the data standards, as well as the governance and the ethics and the equalities issues. So we are part of these conversations. That is true in a UK 4 nations sense, and it's true on the international front as well. But of course, at the moment, the biggest focus and the biggest priority is to get the vaccine to as many people as possible, and that's what we should focus on as we continue to work our way through these other issues. Simon Johnson from The Telegraph.
Thank you, First Minister. As you're aware, in recent weeks and months, we've had some deeply unfortunate messaging from the continent in terms of the efficacy of the Oxford vaccine, and now in terms of this blood clot issue. The Prime Minister announced at PMQs that he'll be having his vaccine very shortly, and he'll make sure it's the Oxford vaccine. Is there any mileage in you doing something similar when you have your vaccine shortly, in terms of bolstering public confidence and dispelling some of these messages?
Look, the Prime Minister, I think, is marginally older than me, so he'll be probably getting his vaccine slightly before me, but only marginally older than me, I think. I'm hoping to get my vaccine over the next few weeks. And I said the other day, I'll get the vaccine as soon as it's offered to me, and I will get it whether it's Pfizer or Oxford AstraZeneca. I want vaccinated, and I will have no hesitation in getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. I don't know about the ethics of demanding in a way that nobody else can, whether I get one over the other, but happy to talk to Gregor and others about whether that would be appropriate. What I have always been really certain about is that I'm very enthusiastic about getting this vaccine, but I never wanted to get anything that other people don't have or get anything quicker than anybody else. I'll get it when my turn arises, and I don't think others are getting to choose which one they have. So whether it would be fair for me to get to do that, but if I'm offered the AstraZeneca vaccine, I will get it without a heartbeat of hesitation, and the sooner the better. And that is my advice to anybody. As soon as you get your vaccine invitation, go and get vaccinated, whatever one they offer you, because the benefits of it are significant, and the more of us that get it, the more benefits collectively we'll all enjoy from it. Gregor.
So I should say at this point in time that I'll still be a few weeks after the First Minister when I get offered my vaccine. But I'll have no hesitation in getting the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine whatsoever at all. The data that I've seen on this